The order that was given was to kill everybody in the village.
And shot this kid. And we're both down in a cross position. I stood up and he started standing up and I said, why?
I didn't know I was gonna kill anyone. I didn't want to kill anyone. I wasn't raised up to kill.
Between 1965 and 1973, the United States engaged in a grueling conflict against the communist forces of North Vietnam. This war was marked by brutal guerrilla warfare, sending young American soldiers far from home to confront an enemy that utilized tactics the U.S. military had never before encountered. The Vietnam War remains a highly controversial subject. Some view it as a justified defense of South Vietnam against Northern communist aggression, while others see it as an unjustifiable act of U.S. imperialism driven by Cold War-era anti-communist hysteria. The U.S. government entered the Vietnam conflict with the intention of preventing the spread of communism, adhering to the domino theory, which suggested that if one country in a region fell to communism, others would quickly follow. This belief was deeply rooted in Cold War paranoia, where the fear of communism's spread led to American intervention in various parts of the world, often with catastrophic consequences. However, there is a consensus that the war resulted in the deaths of millions, with a significant portion being civilians killed by U.S. forces. Among these civilian casualties, none are more infamous than the harrowing events of the My Lai Massacre on March 16, 1968, which claimed the lives of 504 innocent civilians, including women and children. By 1968, the Vietnam War was going poorly for the United States. The Tet Offensive, launched by North Vietnam in January 1968, had severely strained America's military capabilities and shattered morale both at home and abroad.
The Viet Cong, taking advantage of the noisy celebration, launched a savage attack on Saigon, violating the truce they themselves had proposed.
The Tet Offensive was a series of surprise attacks by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces across South Vietnam, and although it was a military defeat for the North, it marked a significant psychological victory that eroded public support for the war in the United States.
It's just a constant siege here, and you don't know exactly when the incoming's coming, and you don't know how much it's going to be from day to day.
The scale and intensity of the Tet Offensive exposed the vulnerability of U.S. forces and contradicted official reports that the U.S. was winning the war. In a desperate attempt to regain the initiative, the U.S. launched a series of counter-offensives aimed at pushing back the communist forces. One such target was Quang Ngai Province, particularly the village of Xuan Mai. Xuan Mai consisted of several smaller hamlets, including My Lai. For simplicity, we will refer to the entire village by the more well-known name, My Lai. My Lai, dubbed Pinkville by American soldiers due to its perceived communist sympathies, was believed to be a stronghold of the Viet Cong, VC. U.S. intelligence reported that the VC were active in the area, essentially considering the village a communist outpost. In March 1968, Task Force Barker was assembled to address the situation in My Lai. This task force consisted of soldiers from two companies, Company C, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, and Company B, 3rd Infantry Regiment, 11th Brigade, 23rd Infantry Division. For clarity, we will refer to them as B Company and C Company. Although an A Company was also present, their role in the events was relatively minimal. C Company was under the command of Captain Ernest Medina, with Lieutenant William Calley serving as his second-in-command. Despite not having engaged in direct combat since arriving in Vietnam in December 1967, C Company had already lost 28 men to booby traps and landmines by March 1968. These losses, combined with the harsh conditions and constant fear, had taken a toll on the soldiers, who were consumed by anger, frustration, and a desire for revenge, emotions that would soon lead them to take drastic actions. On March 15th, C Company held a memorial service for a beloved sergeant who had been killed the previous day. The atmosphere was charged with grief and anger, and the soldiers, already on edge, were further pushed toward the brink. That evening, Task Force Barker received orders to launch an attack on My Lai the following morning. The plan was for C Company to enter the village itself, while B Company would secure a nearby hamlet, and A Company would be stationed to intercept any fleeing Viet Cong, VC, outside the village. Captain Medina informed C Company that they should expect significant resistance from the communist forces, who were believed to outnumber them 2-1. He also told his men that the civilian population would be leaving for the market by 7 a.m. the next day, implying that anyone still in the village should be considered an enemy combatant. The details of what transpired during the briefing are unclear. Some soldiers later claimed that Medina was asked about how to handle women and children, with orders allegedly given to kill any combatants or suspected combatants. One soldier remembered Medina saying, "They're all VC, now go and get them." Another recalled him describing the enemy as all deserving to die. As chilling as these statements may seem, they were not out of the ordinary for the time. Many soldiers and observers noted the casual approach to violence against civilians among American troops.
Michael Bernhardt, a soldier of Charlie Company who was present at the scene, would later go on to say, "We met no resistance, and I only saw 3 captured weapons. We had no casualties. It was just like any other Vietnamese village. Old papa-sons, women and kids. As a matter of fact, I don't remember seeing one military-age male in the entire place, dead or alive."
In Vietnam, body counts were the primary measure of a unit's effectiveness, with higher counts leading to greater favor from command. Consequently, civilians were often included in the enemy death toll. At 7:24 a.m. on March 16th, artillery fire broke the morning calm of the Vietnamese countryside. Shells rained down on the shocked and unsuspecting civilian population. Between 7:30 and 7:37 a.m., C Company was airlifted by helicopter into the hamlet of My Lai. Nearby, a helicopter crew engaged 4 suspected combatants outside the village. These would be the only potential fighters encountered by the Americans that day. Intelligence had clearly failed. There were no VC fighters in My Lai, and only one weapon was found in the entire village. Moreover, the civilians had not gone to the market as expected. Despite the artillery bombardment, the villagers cautiously welcomed the American soldiers. The GIs quickly rounded up the civilians and gathered them in common areas throughout the village, seemingly unaware of the impending danger. Accounts of what happened next vary, but it is reported that, without warning, one U.S. soldier stabbed a civilian with a bayonet. This act of violence triggered a brutal frenzy among the other soldiers, who followed suit with savage efficiency. Gunfire erupted, and the village was filled with the sounds of screaming as the massacre began. The American soldiers showed no mercy. They threw grenades into bunkers to kill civilians hiding inside, shot anyone they encountered, stabbed them with bayonets, or burned them alive in their homes. No one was spared in the relentless onslaught. Women cried out, "No VC," but their pleas fell on deaf ears. One private recalled witnessing women throwing themselves over their children in a desperate attempt to protect them, but the GIs mercilessly shot the parents and then executed the children. The American soldiers even resorted to using grenade launchers on groups of civilians to expedite the killing process. Meanwhile, B Company was deployed to a nearby hamlet. About 45 minutes after C Company had landed, although the events were less well documented, they carried out a similar massacre, killing between 60 and 155 people over the next few hours. In one particularly horrific incident, a group of 20 to 50 civilians was led to a dirt road just outside My Lai, where they were executed en masse. This atrocity was witnessed by U.S. Army photographer Sergeant Ronald Haberly. Though he was there in an official capacity, Haberle, horrified by what he saw, took additional photographs with his personal camera. These images would later become iconic and play a crucial role in bringing the massacre to light years later. Some of his most famous photos depict groups of terrified civilians bound and moments away from execution, while others show the aftermath, with the lifeless bodies of women and children scattered on the ground. Haberle vividly remembered seeing an injured boy, dazed and already shot in the arm and leg, stumbling through the chaos. As Haberle knelt to capture the scene, an American soldier approached the boy and, with 3 shots, killed him before walking away.
A group of bodies here I later, found and photographed. A small kid was walking out from the rice, but it was a little higher than this. He was walking out toward the bodies. He was shot in the arm, he was shot in the leg, walking toward the bodies. He knelt down beside me and shot this kid. And we're both down in a cross position. I stood up and he started standing up, and I said, "Why?" He looked at me, turned, just walked away. I yelled at him again, "Why?"
Among the most conspicuous perpetrators was Lieutenant William Calley, the second in command of C Company. Numerous soldiers later testified that Calley had been the one to give direct orders to shoot civilians. Calley had rounded up 70 to 80 civilians and marched them to an irrigation ditch east of the settlement, where he ordered his men to execute them. Calley himself set his rifle to full automatic mode and did not cease firing until every civilian was dead. The massacre also included instances of rape, with at least 20 women and girls known to have been assaulted, though the actual number is likely higher. One particularly brutal case involved a woman who was raped immediately after a soldier had shot her children. The massacre continued for hours, with specialist Vernado Simpson later claiming to have personally killed or mutilated 25 people.
When you went into the village, that if you found women, old men, children, anything that was living, you knew that you were going to have to kill them that day?
From women and children to dogs and cats, yes. Yes.
So,
but I didn't know it, that I was going to do that. I knew the women and children was there. But for me to say that I was going to kill them, I didn't know I was going to do that until it happened. I didn't know I was going to kill anyone. I didn't want to kill anyone. I wasn't raised up to kill.
One soldier likened the event to just like a Nazi-type thing. While some soldiers refrained from participating in the violence, none from C Company attempted to protest or stop the massacre. Throughout the ordeal, only 1 shot was fired at an American soldier, and that was by another American who intentionally shot himself in the foot to be withdrawn from the scene. This act was viewed by some as a genuine attempt to avoid committing war crimes, while others saw it as a cowardly effort to escape while doing nothing to prevent the killings. Amidst the horror, there were 3 soldiers who displayed remarkable bravery and humanity. A helicopter crew consisting of Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr., Specialist Lawrence Colburn, and Specialist Glenn Andriotta were appalled by the unfolding events and attempted to intervene to save the civilians. They spotted an injured woman in a field trying to flee. The crew radioed for help but received no response. They launched a smoke grenade in an attempt to provide her with cover, but could only watch in helplessness as Captain Medina coldly approached the woman and executed her at point-blank range. Thompson later observed troops advancing toward a bunker filled with civilians and quickly landed his helicopter between the soldiers and the bunker. Leading the troops was none other than Lieutenant Calley. Thompson urged Calley to help the civilians escape, but Calley dismissively replied that it would be better to kill them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Thompson took matters into his own hands. He and his crew began evacuating the civilians themselves. Thompson ordered his helicopter gunner, Specialist Colburn, to shoot any American soldier who attempted to stop the evacuation. None did. The crew managed to save about a dozen civilians, and Specialist Glenn Andriotta even jumped into the irrigation ditch filled with bodies to rescue a 4-year-old child who had miraculously survived. Despite the heroic efforts of Thompson and his crew, who managed to save several lives, the overwhelming loss of life rendered their actions a bittersweet solace. Estimates of the death toll vary. The Vietnamese government reports 504 victims, while American records claim 347. The vast majority were women and children, with at least 17 of the women being pregnant and 56 of the children being infants. Among the male victims, almost half were over 60 years old, and the rest were mostly too elderly or ill to pose any threat. Notably, only 4 suspected VC soldiers were killed, and they were located outside the village. Upon returning to base, Thompson and his crew immediately reported the atrocities they had witnessed. Thompson told his captain, "It's mass murder out there. They're rounding them up and herding them in ditches and then just shooting them." These reports ascended the chain of command, eventually reaching Colonel Orrin Henderson, who interviewed Thompson shortly thereafter. However, hopes for justice were swiftly dashed. The official report from Task Force Barker falsely claimed that they had killed 128 VC, making no mention of civilian casualties. Military leadership chose to accept this version of events. Astonishingly, less than 2 weeks after the massacre, Henderson, despite his interview with Thompson, recommended Captain Medina for promotion. General William Westmoreland, head of the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, even sent a congratulatory message to C Company, and military newspapers lauded the company's supposed victory over a village of VC soldiers. Nevertheless, skepticism lingered. An initial military investigation concluded that 20 civilians had inadvertently been killed, mostly due to the opening artillery barrage. Meanwhile, the truth was an open secret among the soldiers of C Company, who openly bragged about executing hundreds of civilians. Specialist Ron Ridenour became aware of these accounts and, while flying over My Lai days later, observed the irrigation ditches still filled with civilian bodies. Despite mounting evidence, it took months for any substantive action to occur. In late 1968, Tom Glenn penned a letter to military authorities, highlighting a widespread pattern of violence against civilians in Vietnam. Although My Lai was not specifically mentioned, the implication was clear. The military assigned a young Colin Powell to investigate these claims. Powell, who would later serve as the U.S. Secretary of State, quickly dismissed the accusations as exaggerated. This dismissal, part of a larger pattern of minimizing civilian casualties in official reports, highlights how deeply the military was entrenched in covering up the atrocities committed by its own soldiers. The story might have remained obscured were it not for the investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. Aware of the simmering allegations surrounding My Lai, Hersh pursued the story with dogged determination. On November 13, 1969, he published a groundbreaking article that exposed both the massacre and the military's limited prosecution of Lieutenant Calley. Hersh's reporting was a turning point, bringing the horrors of My Lai into the public eye and forcing the U.S. government and military to confront the atrocities committed under their watch. In the ensuing weeks, Sergeant Ronald Haberle, the photographer present during the massacre, released his harrowing photographs to Life and Time magazines. These images starkly revealed the brutality of the events, leaving an indelible mark on public consciousness. The graphic nature of these photos, showing bound civilians moments before their execution, and the lifeless bodies of women, children, and the elderly, shocked the American public and the world. U.S. soldiers had massacred hundreds of Vietnamese civilians and then attempted to cover it up. The revelations were shocking and severely undermined public confidence in the war. The Nixon administration, led by National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, made efforts to contain the story but ultimately failed. By the end of the year, CBS was broadcasting interviews with soldiers who openly admitted their involvement in the massacre.
So the order that was given was to kill everybody in the village. Someone asked if that meant the women and children, and the order was everyone in the village.
Despite these confessions, many Americans found it difficult to believe that U.S. troops could commit such atrocities. A poll conducted in Minnesota revealed that 49% of respondents believed the story was false, viewing it as a fabrication by anti-war advocates aiming to discredit the military. The outcry following the exposure of My Lai was significant. Anti-war protests, which had been growing in intensity throughout the 1960s, reached new heights as the full scale of American atrocities in Vietnam became undeniable. The My Lai Massacre became a symbol of the moral and ethical failures of the war, encapsulating the consequences of unchecked military power and the dehumanizing effects of prolonged conflict. Faced with mounting pressure, the military had no choice but to launch a proper investigation. Lieutenant General William Pierce was appointed to lead it. In his March 1970 report, Pierce confirmed that at least 200 civilians had been killed, while only 4 Viet Cong were among the dead. He concluded that a tragedy of significant proportions had occurred. The Pierce report was comprehensive, documenting not only the massacre itself, but also the subsequent cover-up, implicating numerous officers in the attempt to suppress the truth. As a result, 26 soldiers were charged, although this represented only a small fraction of those involved. 4 officers, including Lieutenant Calley, and 9 enlisted men were charged with participating in the massacre, while 12 others faced charges related to the cover-up. Out of the 25 charged, only 5 went to trial, and of those, all but 1 were acquitted. On March 29, 1971, Lieutenant William Calley was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the murder of at least 22 innocent civilians. He was the only individual ever charged in connection with the My Lai Massacre. During his trial, Calley showed no remorse, insisting that he was simply following orders. He remained convinced that the civilians of My Lai were his enemies, stating, "When it came between me and that enemy, I had to value the lives of my troops, and I feel that is the only crime I have committed." Public reactions to Calley's sentence were mixed. Many people continued to believe the accusations were false, while others felt his actions were justified. A Gallup poll revealed that 79% of Americans disapproved of Calley's life sentence, with a significant number arguing that he should not have been charged at all. In response to public sentiment, President Nixon quickly intervened, reducing Calley's life sentence to house arrest. By 1974, Calley received a full pardon after serving only 3.5 years. The case of William Calley became a flashpoint in American discourse about the Vietnam War. It sparked debate about individual responsibility in the context of war, the ethics of following orders, and the extent to which lower-ranking soldiers should be held accountable for actions taken under the command of their superiors. Calley's pardon by President Nixon further polarized the American public, with some viewing him as a scapegoat for broader military failings, while others saw him as a war criminal who escaped justice. Meanwhile, the heroic actions of Thompson, Colburn, and Andreotta went unrecognized for years. Initially, the military awarded Thompson the Distinguished Flying Cross for rescuing civilians from a combat zone, while Colburn and Andreotta received the Bronze Star. However, Thompson was so disgusted by the falsehoods in his commendation, which attempted to obscure the massacre, that he discarded the award. Tragically, Andreotta was killed in action later that year, never seeking justice for the events at My Lai. It wasn't until 1998, 30 years after the massacre, that Thompson and Colburn were awarded the Soldier's Medal, the highest honor the Army bestows for non-combat actions, with Andreotta receiving the honor posthumously. The 2 surviving men even returned to My Lai, where they met some of the people they had saved. However, the psychological scars from that day remained, with Thompson suffering from severe PTSD for the rest of his life due to the traumatic events he witnessed. The recognition of Thompson, Colburn, and Andreotta as heroes was a belated but crucial acknowledgement of their courage in the face of overwhelming atrocity. Their actions provided a stark contrast to the brutality displayed by their fellow soldiers and demonstrated that, even in the darkest moments of war, there is potential for humanity and moral courage. My Lai became a flashpoint in the Vietnam War, revealing to the world that the U.S. was capable of committing atrocities on par with those of the very enemy they professed to stand against. The massacre and its cover-up forced a reckoning within the United States, not only about the conduct of the war, but also about the very nature of American military and foreign policy. The My Lai Massacre also brought to light troubling questions about the broader conduct and attitudes within the Vietnam War. Numerous soldiers stepped forward, asserting that the horrors of My Lai were not an isolated incident, but rather indicative of a pattern they had witnessed throughout Vietnam. One sergeant even claimed that there was a My Lai occurring every month for over a year. These claims suggest that the dehumanization of the enemy and the indiscriminate killing of civilians were more widespread than previously acknowledged, raising serious ethical and moral questions about the conduct of the war. While the known details of My Lai are horrifying on their own, a more unsettling question lingers. What other atrocities took place that we may never learn about? The massacre is a stark reminder of the potential for war to strip away humanity and lead to acts of unimaginable cruelty, especially in an environment where violence becomes normalized and accountability is absent. The legacy of My Lai continues to resonate, influencing discussions about military ethics, the rules of engagement, and the importance of accountability in warfare. It serves as a cautionary tale, reminding both military leaders and the public of the catastrophic consequences that can arise when power is unchecked and moral boundaries are crossed. The My Lai Massacre stands as one of the most egregious examples of war crimes committed by U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. The events of that day and the subsequent attempts to cover them up reveal the dark underbelly of a conflict that was already deeply controversial and widely opposed. The massacre not only resulted in the senseless loss of hundreds of innocent lives, but also exposed the moral and ethical failings of a war that many believed should never have been fought. As we reflect on My Lai, it is crucial to remember the lessons it teaches us about the nature of war, the importance of accountability, and the need to uphold human dignity, even in the most challenging circumstances. The bravery of individuals like Hugh Thompson, Lawrence Colburn, and Glenn Andreatta reminds us that, even in the face of overwhelming evil, there is always the potential for good. The My Lai Massacre should never be forgotten. It is a sobering reminder of the horrors that can occur when dehumanization and unchecked power prevail. As we continue to examine the Vietnam War and its legacy, My Lai stands as a symbol of the importance of transparency, justice, and the enduring need to confront the darkest chapters of our history with honesty and integrity. If you found this video informative and want to see more content on important topics like this, please remember to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to grow and produce more videos that shed light on these crucial issues.